Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back, but if you're new, welcome to the show. In this series every week, we speak to the biggest names in business all across the globe. We talk about their career stories, the lessons learned, how they overcome challenges, and what success habits they practice. Practical advice to help you in your career. If you have a passion for business, then this is the podcast for you. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Frank King from Eugene, Oregon in the US. Frank King is a suicide prevention speaker and trainer and was a writer for The Tonight Show for 20 years. He's fought a lifetime battle with major depressive disorder and suicidal ideation, turning that long, dark journey of the soul into 6 TEDx Talks and sharing his life-saving insights on mental health awareness with associations, corporations and colleagues. Depression and suicide run in Frank's family. He's thought about killing himself more times than he can count. A motivational public speaker, he uses his life lessons to start the conversation, giving people permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences surrounding depression and suicide. And by doing so and coming out, as it were, and standing in his truth, and doing it in humour, Frank believes that where there is humour, there is hope. Where there is laughter, there is life. Nobody dies laughing. The right person at the right time with the right information can save a life. Frank, thanks for joining me on this episode.
Hey.
So this introduction even in itself is very moving. Tell us about you, Frank. Tell us about your story.
I started doing comedy in the 4th grade. I told a joke. The kids laughed. The teacher was hysterical. And I thought, I'm going to be a comedian. And I did the 12th grade talent show. Nobody had ever done stand-up before. This is the spring of 1975. And I won. I told my mama, I'm going to be a comedian. And she said, well, you're going to college first. I don't care what you do when you get done. You can be a goat herder for all I care. But you're going to be a goat herder with a college degree. So I went to UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Got a couple of college degrees. Married my high school / college sweetheart. Moved to San Diego. Was selling insurance, which I hated with a passion. And there's a comedy store in San Diego, a branch of the famous one up on Sunset in LA. And they had an open mic night. And I stepped on stage. Halfway through my 5 minutes, I heard inside my head, "You're home." That was the beginning of the end of my first marriage and my insurance career. And then my second wife and I were on the road for 2,629 nights in a row.
Wow.
7 years and change, no home, just going from comedy club to comedy club from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. And then I got a job in radio, terrestrial radio. I took a #1 morning show and drove it to #6 in 18 months, one of my proudest accomplishments, and got fired. Started doing corporate comedy, after dinner, after lunch at a conference or convention. And then the recession. Speaking business dropped off 80% overnight. We lost everything we put together in 25 years in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like.
What an interesting story already, Frank.
I did not pull the trigger.
And kind of being on the road, doing comedy, obviously, being on a stage at all is not an easy thing to do. And, you to do it back then, especially when, a stand-up comedy, it's all over the place now. But to do it when you did it, there weren't a lot of people doing that. Where did you get that confidence from to kind of get on the stage, and especially to do comedy? It's, I can think of nothing worse than being on the stage and people not laughing, Frank.
Well, that happens. No, people sometimes ask me, they go, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm a comedian. No, not what you do, who you are. Well, at the risk of being redundant, I am a comedian. Every fiber of my being. I believe that my comic ability, imagination, creativity are simply the flip side of my depression and thoughts of suicide, because it's the same brain. I can teach you to do stand-up. I can teach you to write stand-up. What I cannot teach you to do is process the incoming information the way my brain does.
And where did you get that kind of motivation and passion for comedy?
It, like the suicidality and the depression, runs in my family. My mother was very funny. My dad as well. My sister's very funny. It's just the way my brain is wired. I knew from 4th grade that's what I wanted to do. It just felt right. And it felt right when I got on stage that first open mic night. And I said to myself, I'm going to do this for a living. I have no idea how, but I'm going to do it for a living. And a year later, I said to my girlfriend, now my wife of 34 years, I'm going on the road to do stand-up. You want to come along for the ride? Figuring she'd go, oh, heck no. And she said, yes. So we both gave up our jobs, the apartment, put all sorts of stuff into storage and took off and worked with, in comedy clubs with Dennis Miller and Jeff Foxworthy and Jerry Seinfeld, Adam Sandler, Kevin James, back when they were just comics working the road. It was an amazing time to be in comedy and be on the road with those, with those folks.
And I want to sort of talk about the delicate subject that is the battles that you've kind of fought. And we said before we started recording this that I'm a big mental health advocate. I've obviously gone through my own journey with things like this as well. But as I said in the show introduction, you fought a lifetime battle with major depressive disorder and, as I said, suicidal ideation. Was that's been there even, in those early days of doing comedy, kind of, I'm assuming?
Actually, it's the reason I do comedy. I have a TEDx talk called Suicide, the Secret of My Success, Dead Man Talking. And what happened was I was married to my first wife, who's a wonderful woman, but it's not for me. We had no business being together. But you know what they say, opposites attract. She was pregnant, I wasn't. And I was selling, and I was miserable. I mean, as nice as she was, we didn't belong together. And then I was selling insurance, which I hated. Great business, but not for me. And that's the first time suicidality really reared its ugly head. I realized that if I did not make changes and soon, that I was going to kill myself. My second thought was, well, wait a minute. I could divorce my wife, quit my job. I could try comedy. And if it works out, and I think it will, that's great. And if it doesn't work out, I can still kill myself. That's why suicide is the secret of my success.
And to some people listening to that, when you describe it, you describe it with somewhat good humour. To a lot of people, they're going to be thinking, how is Frank processing it in this way? How is he, turning this into laughter? How does it work in your mind, Frank?
Well, in comedy, you can make fun of any group to which you belong.
Right.
So being mentally ill and suicidal, both. I belong to the group, so I can get away with it. And it's when I do my keynotes, I don't tell jokes. I tell funny anecdotes, funny mental health anecdotes. And it's just, again, it's just the way my brain works. I was in Iowa in the U.S. earlier this week. I was doing two shows, actually, 2 hours long each, on suicide prevention as a workplace health and safety issue. And I'm driving from the hotel to the venue. And on the way, I passed this beat up, rundown, obviously very, down at the heels motel named the South T, as in Tom, South T Motel, with a sign out front that said remodeled. And then I passed a fundraiser in a park, raised money for the rocket. And then I passed a restaurant with a strange specialty, which I memorized I'm going by. And so when I get on stage, my opening joke was, hey, listen, I stayed at the South T Motel last night. They remodeled, and I shudder to think what it looked like before they remodeled. So on the way to the venue, in the 8 minutes that Google said it took me to get from the hotel to the venue, I wrote my opening joke. My brain just processes incoming information that way. And it's the same thing with the suicidality. In comedy, they say comedy is tragedy plus time. So, and the longer you do comedy, the shorter the time between the tragedy and the comedy. And so it took me a while to write funny on, putting the barrel of a gun in my mouth in our barn. But I did. And then I've added to that sense. A friend of mine came up to me at a keynote. He'd never heard me say I didn't pull the trigger. And he said to me, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? And I said, hey, man, can you try to sound a little less disappointed? I didn't write on the spot, but not too long after I wrote that bit. So there's a funny side to almost everything. It's just a comedian's job to find the safe target.
How do you do that?
Well, nobody gets hurt.
Right.
And you never shoot down. You never aim down. You're always, comedians speak truth to power. You're always, any shot you take have got to be up.
Right.
Yeah, you can't, shooting down, making fun of, and you cannot make fun of something that someone cannot change. If you're Caucasian, you can't make fun of somebody for being black because they'll always be black. If you can make some fun of somebody who is ignorant because you can cure ignorance. You learn and you can cure. Although Ron White says, and I believe it, you can't cure stupid. There's no cure for stupid, but you can cure ignorance. A more delicate business and science than people realize.
I would be inclined to agree with you there. And it sounds to me that, everything that you've kind of gone through, and it must have been absolutely awful at times, but what you've kind of gone through with your struggles, it sounds like that has been such a kind of driving force. It's like your whole career seems to have that backdrop, and that seems to, even though it sounds very strange to even say it, it sounds like that's what's made you successful.
Yeah, somebody at the Iowa event asked me, when did you begin this journey speaking on suicide prevention?
Mm.
And I said, when I had the barrel of the gun in my mouth, although I didn't know it at the time, but I was beginning that journey. What happened was, after the recession began to ease up and the meeting planners called me and they said, Frank, look, we love you, but we can't pay that, because I was making, good money for 45 minutes of comedy. Clean. See, people will pay a lot of money for a clean comedian, because if they book you, their job's on the line if you screw it up.
Well, true.
So, yeah. I've often told them, when I tell them what I charge, they go, holy smoke. For 45 minutes of comedy? I said, no, you're not paying me for 45 minutes of comedy. And the jokes I'm going to tell. You're paying me for 45 minutes of comedy and the jokes I'm not going to tell, and the wisdom to know the difference. But they said, look, Frank, we love you. We can't book you to be funny, just funny anymore. You need to teach our audience something. And I'd wanted to do that for a long time. I'd wanted to make a living and a difference. I just could never figure out what I had to teach anybody. And then I began to think about my close call with suicide and my family. I mean, everybody in my family. There are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. And my grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. So it's in the family. It's called generational depression and suicide. So I thought, you know what? I could talk about my lived experience and my family's. I could add some humor, and I could get some training on suicide prevention. So that's what I did. I got some training on suicide prevention, and that's the core curriculum. I teach people what depression and thoughts of suicide look and sound like, and then what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, and resources. Because oftentimes you'll hear people say, gosh, this guy never gave any hint before he killed himself. But that's not the case generally. 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent, and 9 out of 10 give hints in the last 7 days leading up to an attempt. So if you know what to look and listen for, and if you know what to say and do, you can make a difference. You can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as we're doing right here and start a conversation.
And I do want to talk about this because I think it's such an important point, and suicide in itself it's not really talked about, Frank. It's even we're only just waking up to kind of depression, but I always think that we live in this kind of taboo where I don't know what it's like necessarily in the US, but in this country I could not imagine phoning my employer and saying, I'm not coming in today because I've got depression. Whereas, if it was a physical ailment, I would feel comfortable doing that. Is that something that you kind of come up against?
Oh, yes. If I had diabetes.
Oh, I have diabetes.
Okay. People say, I would never take a psychotropic, a medication for depression.
Yeah.
Well, what if you were diabetic? Would you take insulin? I mean, it's very, both are chronic ailments.
Yeah.
Both are treatable. I've got a cousin who lives with bipolar disorder. And she says, I wish I had cancer because all my hair would fall out and people could see that and they would be kind. They'd make me casseroles, but the bipolar is all on the inside. She's been shunned by a goodly number of members of our family for that.
Oh, that's awful. How long have you been doing the suicide prevention work?
Well, let's see. I started after the last recession. I have a motivational speech and a networking speech. So I started doing those after the recession when they said they needed something, teach them something. And then the trick for me was I've been funny for decades, and so I had to rebrand. And I said to my wife, I got to rebrand. And she said, well, do a TEDx talk. And I famously said, what's a TEDx talk? And just by chance, that weekend, I got an email from Vancouver, British Columbia saying, would you like to audition, or no, would you like to apply to do the TEDx talk in Vancouver? And so I filled out the application and I got it. And I did it on suicide prevention. And I came out on stage as depressed and suicidal at age 58. Nobody in my family, not my wife, my friends, nobody knew I was depressed, living with depression and thoughts of suicide until I went on stage and told the world on YouTube. Matter of fact, my wife, when the TEDx went up on YouTube, I said to my wife as she's about to hit start or play, hold on, I need to tell you half a dozen things I don't want you to learn watching that video. She had no idea.
And how did she feel? Because obviously she must have thought that, how did I not know this? Or did she spot it, some signs or?
Well, I was moody and occasionally, and she wrote it off. I'm sort of carbohydrate sensitive. So if I had a Snickers bar, an hour later, I'd be grumpy. So she just wrote it off as, it's a carbohydrate thing. And now that she does know, and I said this in my speech in Iowa, I think if you feel comfortable, you need to tell people that you know, love, and trust what you're going through, because that way they're not going to be blindsided. When I'm depressed, I tell her right away, I'm cycling down, so that if she sees me scowling or frowning, she won't assume it's something she's done. Right, she'll know that I'm cycling down. So it makes the marriage better. It makes that, my 3 days easier a little bit. And she's half British with an amazing sense of humor. So when I told her that one of my triggers was disappointing her, that'll send me into a decline. So every now and then I'll say, after I do something stupid, are you mad at me? And she'll say, no, honey, I'm not mad. I'm disappointed.
That's always the worst one as well, isn't it, Frank?
Yes, but because she knows what's happening, she knows that's a trigger for me. We can joke about it, and it makes the whole situation easy.
What you're doing and the help that you're kind of publicity that you're raising for this is all absolutely great. I think it's I'm getting my head around it as well, Frank, that you can be a comedian, and what you're doing with your suicide prevention work, and the two combined, it is a very strange mix, isn't it? But it does also totally make sense. Is that a reaction that you often kind of get from people? It's sort of a bit, this is, such a serious subject, but to kind of put humor behind it, do people sometimes go, Frank, this is unusual.
Well, and I open almost every keynote or training that I do by saying, look, we need to address the elephant in the room, which is, wait a minute, a comedian talking about depression and thoughts of suicide? How does that work? And my answer is, the world's first comedian was the court jester. And the court jester's job was to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. And I believe I speak truth to the power of mental illness on behalf of those often powerless in its grip with humor. And number two, where there's humor, there's hope. Where there's laughter, there's life. Nobody dies laughing. And three, I give them my family history. And then I talk about my near, my brush with suicide. And also I have that chronic suicidal ideation. I've said that out loud to clinicians, mental health clinicians, and they stare at me like Kim Kardashian looking at the New York Times crossword puzzle. And it's not in the DSM, it's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So sometimes they have no idea what I'm talking about. So what I do is I tell the story that people in my tribe, suicide's always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts unbidden: get it fixed, buy new, and I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. Now, every keynote I've given since 2014, except for one, there's been at least somebody in the audience who has chronic suicidal ideation. They don't know the name. They feel like they're just some kind of freak and completely alone. And I had a young woman, for example, come up after a college show. She said, thanks for your keynote. I said, you're welcome. She said, but I got to tell you, it made me weep. I said, how did it make you weep? She said, well, your story about the car breaking down, get it fixed, buy a new, and just kill yourself? I've been having those thoughts all my life. I did not know that had a name. I just thought I was some kind of freak and completely alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I'm not alone, and I wept.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
powerful, isn't it?
And it happens, like I said, it's happened every time I'm outspoken except once. I sort of feel like, I don't know if you know the character, but there's a character in It's a Wonderful Life named George Bailey.
I don't know it, but please carry on.
Oh man, you've got to watch it. It's a Christmas classic.
Right, I must.
Yeah, what happens is he feels like he runs a little savings and loan in a little town, and he feels like things aren't going well, and he feels like he's never made a difference, and he wishes he were dead. So this angel appears and grants his wish, shows him what this little town would be like if he were never born, not there, and everybody's life in the town would be worse off for him not being there. So I feel kind of like his character in that I've been shown what these people's lives might be like if I were not there to reassure them that it's a thing and they're not alone. My thought was, well, now I can't kill myself, because if I did, I would take all those people with me who never got a chance to hear me say that out loud.
So that's really what you're, and that I was just about to ask you this question. The more that you do this, the more it must be driving you to want to do it. Because like I said to you earlier on, I suffered from psychosis, which was very scary, and I too had suicidal moments through the medication. I can't ever imagine that being a thing that just goes through someone's life. To me, it was my darkest hour. But the more that you do this, it must be driving you to one man on a mission to kind of, it almost feels like, get the whole world talking.
Yes, because as I mentioned earlier, the 8 out of 10 people are ambivalent. 9 out of 10 give hints. So they want somebody to notice something and get involved. And it does. It's my purpose. It's my passion. I go to bed thinking about it. I wake up thinking about it.
Well, let's share the message here, Frank, because I think this is important. And, there might be someone, indeed listening to this who, has someone that they care about who, is perhaps going through this. What are the signs? What should people, perhaps be aware of or be looking out for?
A couple of the signs of depression is have trouble getting up in the morning and getting going, but rally in the afternoon. They eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, maybe can't sleep. And one that you can actually observe on Zoom is they've let their personal hygiene go. So if you're watching them either live or on Zoom and you think, gosh, his hair's a little dirty, his clothes aren't that clean, it may be because they're having difficulty getting out of bed in the morning, running a little wash, taking a shower. So those are three of the top 10 probably of signs of depression, thoughts of suicide. The question comes up: what do you say to somebody who you spotted those signs?
And that's a difficult one. That's probably one a lot of people don't know. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's a difficult conversation. I would say to them, look, I heard a guy speak on depression, and he rattled off 3 or 4 symptoms, and I've noticed that you have 3 of the 4. Are you depressed? And be persistent. And
that's that's a very direct question.
Yes, well, and we'll get to an even more direct one here in a second. Yeah, so what you don't say to somebody who admits they're depressed is, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? What you do say is, look, I know I'm here for you. And I know that you're not crazy, lazy, or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. But the good news is, with time and treatment, things will get better. I'll take the time to help you get the treatment. And here's the difficult question. You have to ask them, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. And if you cannot ask that question, you find somebody who can. But let's say they deny they're having thoughts of suicide, but your intuition tells you they are. What are the signs? What sort of behavior can you spot? Well, they talk about death and dying. They Google death and dying. Death and dying appears as a theme in their music, their comedy, I suppose, their artwork, their writing, gathering the means to die by suicide, whether it's stockpiling medications or purchasing a firearm. In the U.S., 3 times as many women attempt suicide, but men complete more often because they use a firearm. And if they're getting their affairs in order, especially if they're giving
Mm,
away prized possessions, they want to make sure the possessions go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone. And here's one that's counterintuitive and very dangerous. They've been depressed for a long time, and all of a sudden they're happy beyond measure for no apparent reason. But you're happy because, man, finally they're happy. Well, here's the problem. Suicidality is not so much about wanting to kill yourself as it is about wanting to end the pain. So they may be in good spirits because they have chosen time, place, and method for their suicide, and they know the pain is coming to an end. Now, let's say somebody is upfront about their suicidality. Yes, I am having thoughts of suicide. What in the world do you say? Well, you say, do you have a plan? And if they have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's specific to time, place, and method, you need to get them on the phone with the suicide prevention hotline. And if they won't pick up the phone, you pick up the phone, and the volunteer on the other end will do their best to work the phone into the hand of the person who's in crisis. Question comes up, when do I call the constabulary, the cops? Well, if they're in immediate danger to themselves or someone else, you have no choice but to call the police.
I had an experience once with the police, which was not a positive one because I don't think they necessarily. I don't think they're trained in this kind of stuff. Really, would you agree?
Well, over here they are. It's called CIT, Crisis Intervention Training. They're trained to differentiate between a crime and a crisis,
Yeah.
and that they know what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to, and they know where to take them. Because if
Right.
you are actively suicidal, the police will take you, plop you down in front of a judge, and the judge will decide whether you're going to get a 3-day involuntary detention order. So now here, if let's say
That doesn't sound like that's going to make someone necessarily feel better, or can that be something that does save a life?
it's controversial.
Right.
Some people, it is a great help. 3 days where all you have to do is lie in bed. They bring your meals, they adjust your meds. Is great for some people. Some people feel, you're taking away my personal freedom. I mean, whose life is it anyway? If I'm not leaving any collateral damage behind, who are you to tell me that I can't take my life?
So it could in turn fuel a problem and
Yeah,
make it worse.
like I said, I believe it's the way to go because 3 days of simply rest can be very restorative.
Okay.
But if let's say they're suicidal but don't have a plan that's detailed, they just plan's a little amorphous, a little nebulous, then what I would ask them is, okay, well, tell me this: are you going to kill yourself? Just like that. And if they say no, then I say, well, then tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever's keeping them here. And if you ask me, why not? Because even though I have thoughts of suicide all the time, I'm not going to kill myself. One, I would take all those people with me who never got a chance to hear me speak on suicide. And two, my mother and my father wanted desperately to have children. And they couldn't adopt. This is back in the 1940s. Weren't many infants available. So they decided to attempt it the old fashioned way. So my mother got pregnant, carried it to term, and it died shortly after birth. And they waited a year and tried again. My mother got pregnant. She carried it to term, and it died shortly after birth. Where she found the courage to try a third time and then a fourth with my sister, I have no idea. So my feeling is she was so brave and worked so hard to bring me here that I have to be at least as brave and work at least as hard to stick around.
Well, I think you're incredibly brave, Frank. I think to go through this, even throughout your life, and to share your message with people in such a candid, way. I think just hearing you talk, it made I've got goosebumps all over my body, Frank. I'm sitting here with the hairs of my neck standing up. It's made me emotional listening to you. Part way through you speaking, I had my eyes were filling up with tears because it's I think a lot of people have been touched, and if they haven't, I've seen stories, and especially during the pandemic, there seems to have been in this country a spotlight kind of shone on things, but this is just not talked about enough, and it needs to be talked about more. And I wholeheartedly kind of applaud everything you're doing. And, I couldn't imagine, anyone going through suicidal thoughts on a daily basis and having to kind of live that. And the fact that that's still kind of part of your life now, and that is never going to go away. How does that kind of make you feel? Is that something that you've kind of learned to live with, and now you're on this mission to kind of, bring awareness to this?
Well, mental illness has a stigma, and then thoughts of suicide has a stigma. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to people have an idea in their mind what mental illness and thoughts of suicide, or someone who's suicidal, looks and sounds like. And so when I get up on stage, obviously high functioning, mentally ill, and I'm telling humor stories about my journey, then do
people feel comfortable to laugh at that when you're telling these kind of, and is it an awkward laughter, or what's the kind of reaction you get from a audience? Because when you're telling me this, even if you're putting a funny kind of spin on things, it wouldn't feel like a natural laughter. Or is that just me, and am I not with the popular crowd here?
No. When I start, my first joke is usually, I know what the barrel of my gun tastes like. I pause. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. And they start to laugh, but it's sort of it's a nervous
hesitance. Yeah.
Yeah, and I go, look, it's okay to laugh at that. And then I tell the story about my friend who came up after the keynote and said, hey, man, I didn't pull the trigger. And when I get to that punchline, now they've loosened up. Now they know where we're going with all this. And so, but yeah, going after that first laugh, that's why a comedian's a good choice, because I've been doing stand-up for 35 years full time. So
having met you, Frank, I don't now know what you would do that isn't comedy. Having spoken to you, it makes perfect sense.
When I talk to customer service people on the phone, for whatever reason, I always want to be their best customer all day, make them laugh. I'm sorry, Mr. King, that happened. Oh, it is all your fault. I just want you to know that it's all your fault. And they start laughing, and they get harshed on all day.
Well, exactly.
So, it's just the way I relate to the world. Like I said, from the time I left my hotel, the 8 minutes driving to the venue, I had my first bit written, and I'd never said it out loud to anybody before. So, but I had confidence in it, knowing that because it was relatable, because it was about their little town, because I noticed these things. I told a joke about the motel. It was really, the remodel, I'm sure, was nice, but it was a seedy place. I said, look, I checked in last night. I said to the desk clerk through the bank glass, I'm Frank King. I have a room for the night. And he said, and I quote, the whole night? Because it get nuts, because they know it's that kind of motel where, the hot sheet motel where people are renting it by the hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so goodness me.
All about timing, knowing your audience. And I had a heart attack. I was a half mile from the car up a logging trail with the dogs by myself, and I had a heart attack. I knew it was a heart attack because the symptoms presented. I've had 2 valve surgeries, valve replacements, and when I would get angina, as the valve was winding down, the pain would be over my left shoulder. Well, I had the pain over my left shoulder, but with the valve problem, if you stop moving, it stopped hurting. I stopped moving, it got worse. So I knew I was having a heart attack, and I had T-Mobile, so I didn't have cell service. Never fails to get a laugh wherever I go. And so in my talk this week, I said, people sometimes think that anybody with depression and thoughts of suicide is 24/7, 365. They're always on the verge of it. I said, I have more good days than bad. And that day I was in a good place. I didn't want to die. Although I could have died a very socially acceptable death if I just sat down on the trail and let the heart attack run its course. And only the dogs would know that I chose to end my life. But I was in a good place. So I get back to the car, because I had to get the dogs in the car because there's a busy road nearby. That was my only goal, was to get the dogs in the car. And coming down the hill, people always ask, did you see a light? Did you hear your dead relatives? What were you thinking about your wife? No. I was 2 weeks away from giving that first TEDx talk. And I'm coming down the hill, and I'm crying because I'm thinking of all the people I might have saved if I could have just gotten to Vancouver and delivered that talk. I drive 2 miles home, walk in the house, yell to my wife, honey, dial 911, I'm having a heart attack. I didn't want to pick up the phone and then pass out. She says this, I'm in the bathroom, I got the fan on, I can't hear you. Oh, God. I walked half a mile, drove 2 miles, I'm going to die in my hallway. So she called the paramedics. They came very quickly, took me to the hospital. And here's where the tragedy plus time, I was doing comedy at the hospital in real time. And I was in a great deal of pain. The nurse said to me, Frank, I just have to ask you one question. And I said, I'm married, honey, but I love the way you think. And she's trying not to laugh. And then she says, no, your full name is Frank Marshall King III, but what do you like to be called? Through the heart attack pain, I said, Big Daddy. And yeah, to this day, when I go back to the cardiologist, anybody who was there that morning goes, hey, Big Daddy, how's things?
Oh, goodness me. What an interesting conversation, Frank. I think to kind of just bring this back, just to kind of be clear on this, if people know someone that, again, might be struggling, they might have seen signs, or indeed someone themselves is kind of having these feelings of depression or suicide, what should they do?
Well, if it's a friend, a family member, I would, first off, I would listen, not say anything, just actively listen. And then I would recommend, if they have not had a mental health evaluation, to have a mental health evaluation to see what in fact they may be dealing with. Is it depression? Is it a depressive state of manic, bipolar? And I would have a physical, because I have a friend here in town who was terribly depressed, and he had a physical, blood work done, and it turned out his body was not metabolizing iron. And when they gave him a time-released iron supplement, his depression symptoms disappeared. Now, that's rare, but sometimes a physical ailment will present as a mental ailment. And once evaluated, if medication is indicated, I would encourage the person to take the medication. And if it doesn't work, or it doesn't work well, there's a not new, 4 or 5 years old, DNA cheek swab test. And they take your DNA on a cheek swab, like Ancestry.com, and they try to match it to the medication, the psychotropic medication that works best with your metabolism. So there's a lot less of the go on, doesn't work, taper off, go on, doesn't work, taper off. That's what I would do. I would encourage them to be evaluated. Let's see, is it situational depression because of the pandemic? Because that's what worries me, is all the people, neurotypical, neuronormal people, can't get out of bed in the morning, and they can't figure out why, because they've never been depressed. They don't know what that looks and feels like.
No, I totally agree with you. It's people don't even know that they've necessarily got it. So I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, I my second heart surgery, they gave me scopolamine for nausea, and they must have given me some kind of military grade scopolamine, because one of the side effects is it can make you hallucinate. And dear God, did I? I mean, I saw 6 foot tall cartoon characters come and have a conversation. So when somebody has, let's say, schizoaffective disorder, and they're seeing or hearing things, I get it, because I would have sworn in court that I had seen those things. That's how real they were.
When I suffered from psychosis, I saw things which I can relate to you there, which I thought were, I would have bet my life on it that they were real, and then to find out that they weren't real, and that was just something going on inside my head, was so I couldn't accept the fact. I just could not accept that wasn't real, and that in itself took me a very long time to get over, and I definitely came out the other side psychosis different as a person to when I went in it. It knocked my confidence in so many ways.
I tell people, let's say I have a friend who has physical, auditory, and visual hallucinations. I believe he is living with schizoaffective disorder. And so I do something called participative therapy. I'm not a therapist or a clinician. It's just it's a term. And so when he tells me he's feeling, seeing, or hearing something, I don't try to reorient him. I say, Robert, I believe that you believe you are. I believe that that's happening. And it relaxes the person, because if you bump up against him, if you push back, try to reorient, when it's some kind of brain chemistry gone awry, and they, like you and I would have sworn there was somebody standing there. That's what I advise in that case. Same thing with Alzheimer's or dementia. You see your grandmother, she's in the nursing home. She says, what are you doing here in Ireland? Well, you're in New Jersey. You're not in Ireland, but she's in Ireland. So you play along. Oh, I just came. I was in the neighborhood. I decided to stop in and see it, because, again, otherwise she'll get agitated as you try to reorient her to time and place.
Yeah, that's what people did with me at the time. And because if someone said that wasn't real, that would have only made me more infuriated that people couldn't see what I was seeing, and why could they not see that?
My wife did say to me in the hospital at one point, listen, honey, if you don't quit hallucinating, they're not going to let you leave.
Well, it sounds like your wife has been a real rock. Frank, it's been such a moving conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing that with me and with everyone who's listening to this. And I can't commend the work that you do anymore. I think you're a real inspiration. And
Yes.
I wish you all the best of luck with spreading this message to as many people as you can possibly spread it to. If people want to find out more about you, or indeed they want to connect with you, Frank, where can they go to?
I am the mental health comedian. You can also type in thementalhealthcomedian.com. And if you get to my website, I'm writing or co-writing 4 books on men's mental health with 2 co-authors. And the first book,
That's a lot of books, Frank.
Yeah, well, it's on men's mental health, and we thought we'd be lucky if we could get a dozen men to confess they were having problems and then tell us how they were coping. And we ended up getting 64 men. It was 1,000 pages.
Wow.
And so we busted it up into 4 books. And the first one, on my site, if you put an email address in, you get a free MP3 download of the audio book that I narrate at thementalhealthcomedian.com.
I'm definitely going to be listening to that, Frank. I can only imagine it's going to be an absolute roller coaster of emotions going listening to that book with you. Listen, I wish you all the best, and I'm so grateful that you have taken the time today to come onto this show. So a big thank you.
Well, and one quick question: where are you located?
I am actually in a place called Bristol, Frank, which is in the southwest of England, but I'm originally a Londoner.
Well, and I don't know how old you are, but
30, coming up to 34, Frank.
you probably won't. This won't make any sense to you, but if you have older listeners, and they were listening to rock and roll in the mid '90s, there was a song that was very popular, super popular in Great Britain by a band called the Connells, called 7475.
I know the song, Frank. I'm not that old.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to know the song. That's for sure.
And the tagline of the song is "You're my sorry ever after." Well, anyway, I'm in the music video in '95, and then I did a remix in 2015, 20 years later, and we all went back on video to show us 20 years later. So if you go to YouTube and type in 7475, you'll find the videos. The second thing that I worked with a guy named Bill Hicks, a comedian named Bill Hicks. And he was more popular in Great Britain than he was in the U.S. And I'll tell you, when he died, they actually had a moment of silence in Parliament for Bill Hicks. So you can look him up on YouTube. He's lots of his stuff is up there.
Frank, I could talk to you for hours, to be quite honest with you. Normally these episodes are only 30 minutes long, but I could not stop the conversation because I think it's so important. But big thank you, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, and my goal, you asked, was I want to make talking about depression and thoughts of suicide as easy as talking about the weather.
Well, there we go. And with that mission in mind, that was Frank King from Eugene in Oregon in the USA. And I'm Jason Connolly. This is the Career Success Podcast. Until next time, goodbye.